I have so much territory to cover, so I'm just going to get started right at the get-go. So again, I want to say what the cover slide should be is the prophetic history and calling of NCF. I don't want to turn around and look because I see that guy with all the gray hair, so I'm just going to assume that it's up there. We have 34 years that we have been. And over those 34 years, there's an incredible array of experiences that we've had, experiences with God. So this is the 8th one. The second slide will reveal September 27th, part 8. It's hard for me to believe we've gone through 8 of them. I do believe next week will be the last. I think I'll finish it at 9. 9 essentially hour and a half to close to 2-hour sessions. It's been an amazing opportunity to look back on our history and the things that God has done that have indicated, at least to me, where we're going in the future, what is the specific assignment. So these are stories. It's kind of like the Bible is full of the stories of people who had experiences with God and followed God and did what God had for them. This is not a new Bible, but there are experiences that we have had with God. I have used this on several occasions. God was repeatedly showing NCF and myself that He is sovereign in stunning and various unmistakable ways. The sovereignty of God. Stunned again and again. So the ones that were going chronologically almost every time, just year by year, and the order that they occurred in those years, there will be a little bit of combining tonight. But again and again, during this time period, I was stunned, and I think at least some at New Covenant were stunned by the events, the experiences, the things that God was doing. He was catching our attention. I'm reading Mahesh Chavda's book on fasting, and I noticed this statement that he made at the very beginning, because he is a man who has had an incredible record of so many, for many years, he fasted 2 water 40-day fasts a year. And he wrote this statement because he wasn't trying to say to people, you ought to do what I'm doing. He made it very clear, you shouldn't do what I'm doing. And he used this declaration. I've noticed that God always raises up certain men and women to personally live out certain truths to extreme depth so that they can speak and teach them to others with proven authority. I find that to be so true. I have on so many occasions looked at others that God has done this, and I look at what their accomplishments were, and I have so succumbed to the pride of I feel bad because I haven't done or accomplished what I've seen that they've accomplished. And they've had a particular aspect of ministry that God called them to, and I am, to stay in the realm that God's called me. I've added to this statement, sometimes what they are called to do, that God will call them to extreme depth and experiences, and sometimes it's what they are called to do in comparison with what they start with, or where they are, or what their attitudes are, or what their theology is, or what their faith level is. Sometimes God has to do extreme things of major depth to bring them up to speed because He is discipling us unto His purposes. It also calls for extraordinary training and experiences with God. I believe this has been our experience so far. These stories, I believe, will bear that out. I believe at the heart of what God called us to do is calling us, has been calling us, is because of what He's calling us to do. And it takes a people who really do believe Him. And it's requiring, at least from my perspective, such a firm belief. God, you're doing this. This is you. This is so extraordinary. This is stunning. And I get to tell some of those stories tonight. So, synchronized dates. I'm going to begin with this. It is in history. So this is one that I'm on the sideline just watching. The end time harvest, which we are moving into. Synchronized dates. So, this begins with Kathy Grizzell, actually. Synchronized dates and end-time vision. In July 25th of 2007, where we are in our story, Kathy Grizzell had a dream. In the dream, just saying it briefly, in the dream she saw in this sanctuary 11 people who, in the dream, it seemed like they were people who had the faith to raise the dead. It was a little bit specific in that they had the faith to raise the dead. And the date, July 25th, 2007. At least a day or several days later, Debbie Grimes, both of these gals currently in our congregation, Debbie Grimes had a dream, and in her dream, Gary Beaton was in a field, and the field had many horses that were running, just running. And he had a lasso, and he took the lasso, and he lassoed a group of them and got them running in the right direction. That was the dream. They were running in a field, lasso, they start going in the right direction. Debbie and Kathy, who are very good friends, got into conversation, and they both became convinced, I think Gary is to be added. Both of them were in the 11. Gary is to be added, so that made 12. So on August the 1st, 2007, they called the 12 together in here to Kathy and Debbie to tell their dreams and to pray together over, God, what are you saying? What are you doing? August the 1st, 2007, they gathered to pray through the dreams. And at that time, Gary told them, he said, are you aware that the date, there's a synchronization of the date of Kathy's dream? Are you aware of that? He asked them, had you ever heard of the Tommy Hicks end time vision? And Kathy and Debbie both said, no, don't have any idea about the Tommy Hicks end time vision. And so Gary had prepared for that, so to speak, in that he had printed copies of the Tommy Hicks vision, which basically, it occurred in 1961 on July 25th. And he was a very discouraged minister. There's so much to the story, just condensing it to the smallest kernel. He was so discouraged about the shape of the body of Christ. He traveled extensively. And he had heard a testimony of someone in Africa, a missionary who he knew, who had gone to a village and had seen two corpses raised from the dead. And he thought nothing's going on anywhere in the world, any place, on any occasion. Despair, he was covered with despair. And shortly thereafter, the next night, 2 nights, he was actually at Demos Shakarian's home when he had one of his profound experiences with God. He had this dream, and he saw this massive mountain range, north to south. And initially, it looked like it's a mountain range, but he was taken out to space. He was looking at the earth. As he got closer and closer, he realized that's not a mountain range, that's a giant. And it essentially was spread from North Pole to South Pole. And it was covered with all kinds of debris, and he watched this giant shake itself just a little bit and saw thousands and thousands and thousands of little beings. He interpreted them as evil spirits running off of this giant, and the giant would settle back down, and he saw these hordes of things come back and get back on this giant. He saw that happen several times, and eventually he saw the giant stand up and lift his hands to heaven, saying it very briefly, and then he saw Jesus in the clouds, and there was light, liquid light coming from Jesus that was coming to this giant, and it was shedding all of its filth and debris, and it was actually melting. And as it was melting, it was becoming millions and millions of people that were then dispersed all over the world, and they had this liquid light in them, available to them, and they did the works of Jesus. They did the greater works. It was the body of Christ, and they were going worldwide. All of it's not a wonderful story. There were many people who resisted it. They didn't want that. And eventually, it came to the end of things. He saw that vision 3 times, and it was absolutely astounding. So there was a date synchronization. I've noticed for my own self, when I see synchronization of dates and experiences, it catches my attention, and I pay attention to that. So they prayed into that. They prayed, God, was that the lassoing of the horses and getting us going in the right direction to actually, are you speaking to us of end-time ministry and possibly somewhat involvement in what Tommy Hicks saw? I think the answer is yes. And we go on. He's giving hints in various ways. The Bible has impacted me more than any other book. It's possible that The Temple at the Center of Time is a book that, aside from the Bible, has had such a profound impact on me. Talk about stunned. As I read this book, I was just so stunned. It was just hard to believe that this is possible. So The Temple at the Center of Time. In September of 2008, I was told about and got a copy of David Flynn's book called The Temple at the Center of Time. Basically what the book is, Sir Isaac Newton, the celebrated mathematician of about 200 years ago then, spent the last 10 years of his life studying the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation, Solomon's temple, Ezekiel's temple. He was an incredibly brilliant mind, and he was convinced that the secrets of the universe, God gave the secrets of the universe in the dimensions and the construction of Solomon's temple, Ezekiel's temple. He was convinced of that. He was convinced that the prophetic history, the end of the world, so many things, God encoded them in the dimensions and how the temple was built, saying it was the only building in the history of mankind that God gave all the specifics for. There was a central point in the earth, and Isaac Newton was convinced it was the Temple Mount, and it was the location of the Holy of Holies. You have to have a 0 point, a starting point. And he was convinced the starting point was what God picked, which the scriptures make it clear. God said, this is mine. That's where his house was going to be here on the earth in the natural realm. It belonged to him. That was what Isaac Newton said, that's the 0 point. But he couldn't test his theories. He had one of his most profound theories was just because of his study of those things, he came to believe that time and distance, the time in history that something existed, and how far it was from the Temple Mount, the center of everything, he believed somehow, got it from his studies, that they were correlated. Now, that was an astounding idea, but he couldn't test it. He didn't have global positioning or Google Earth or some of the much more sophisticated and so much more accurate programs that exist, military programs and the such that are global positioning. David Flynn was a scientist in his own right, a committed believer, and he took it upon himself to study Sir Isaac Newton's materials, extensive. There was a whole new batch that was made available in libraries in Europe, and he was very familiar and had very incredible and exact global positioning tools available to him, so he decided he would write a book and test Sir Isaac Newton's theories about a correlation between the time in history that something happened and how far away it was from the Temple Mount. Just the idea suggests a level of sovereignty that to me just was rattling me. So, some of the things that are in the book that David Flynn verified. That Jerusalem fell in 587 BC. This was predicted by the prophet Ezekiel. He was in the city of Nippur at that time. Nippur is 587 statute miles from the Temple Mount. When I started reading those things, I thought, no way. Do you mean to tell me that the location, and these would be the central points of these cities, areas, do you mean those are connected? They're just not random where things were in the earth and placed in the earth. They are connected to specifically, significantly the time of interaction with the nation of Israel, God's example, witness. Israel is God's witness. And their location of how far away they were from the Temple Mount, and they could be correlated in a variety of ways. They could be statute miles, they could be nautical miles, they could be meters, they could be feet, they could be inches. I know some of the critics of this book said, it can't be true because There are so many different dimensions that sometimes it's statute miles, sometimes it's nautical miles, sometimes it's feet. My opinion is, how many languages are in the earth? I don't know. 20,000, 40,000, 50,000? God speaks in all of them. How many flowers did he make? Kinds. How many kinds of trees did he make? How many kinds of animals? How many kinds of fish, insects? It's just there, it's inexhaustible. And so you think God is going to be limited to one system? Sometimes he uses the Gregorian calendar, sometimes he uses the Hebrew calendar. Sometimes he uses them both and synchronizes them both. We are so shallow thinking in our thinking that it has to be dished out the way we want it to be dished out, or we think. God is so much beyond that. In my mind, yeah, God hides it, and it's the glory of kings to search it out. I think God hides these things and does it that way just so the arrogant among us cannot figure it out and say, as I've said on many occasions, that's got to be wrong. Babylon falls in 539 BC. And to the center of Babylon of old, it is 539 statute miles from the Temple Mount. I got through two of them. I said, this is impossible. The magnitude of sovereign interaction of God and the actual location in the earth from ground zero, so to speak, the Temple Mount, where the Holy of Holies was. It was like on the inside, I'm stunned on the inside. God is so much bigger, and it's always healthy to encounter, have experiences with him where he is so much bigger, so much more complicated, that it just leaves you, your computer, our little bitty computers, our minds, just they start spinning out of control. It's like, it's too much. It's just, this is so far beyond me. The Exodus, many experts agree that in 1441 BC is when the Exodus occurred. And the Great Pyramid is 1,441 feet from the Temple Mount. You got to really search to find these things. Do you think that's possible? That location, that God's sovereignty expresses itself in all of those things? This just consumed me. Napoleon chose to march on Palestine. And in 1799, he declared, wrote an article, wrote a position paper, so to speak, that he felt that Palestine was the home of the Jews and should be given to them. Notre Dame, the marker, considered the central part of France, the marker is 1,799 nautical miles from the Temple Mount. I love the sound of the train when it comes at opportune times. 1948, England pulls out of Palestine at the end of World War II. They pull out, and then the battle begins for independence, Jews against the Arabs. And in London, in front of that cathedral considered the very central part where Big Ben was, there's a marker. That marker is 1,948 nautical miles from the Temple Mount. That is not random. And we think we are determining our lives, and we're making decisions where we move and when we do so and so, and we're in control. Oh my goodness. Do our decisions make a difference? You bet they do. They make as much difference as Adam and Eve's choice in the Garden of Eden. And Jesus, the eternal Son of God, the Christ, had to lay aside his heavenly splendor and pay the sacrifice for our sin because we couldn't. We were locked in it. Our choices really do make a difference, but we can get locked in this thing that God essentially is out there in the stands somewhere just kind of watching, hoping we make good choices because his hands are tied. Mecca happens to be 666 nautical miles from the Temple Mount. Now that's interesting. I was swept as I read that book. This is so good for the human heart. It was like God became bigger on the inside of me. God wasn't expanding. My grasp and realization of the dimension of God was expanding on the inside of me. And at the same time, I have put up on the slide the number 56, because it was in the fall, early in the fall of 2008, that I came across the temple at the center of time. And it was in the fall of 2008 that the number 56 became significant for New Covenant. Remember, I told you of the prophecy that was given to me by Jim Gall, where he said God was recalibrating you. We had been so focused on Russia, been so focused on taking renewal to so many cities in Russia, and had done so. We had produced that Russia DVD of the prophetic calling on Russian-speaking people, the Slavic people, and had distributed to 1,100 pastors in Kiev, Ukraine in 2006. And in the summer of 2006 is when I had the Jamie Galloway prophecy that I talked about last week, and the Jim Gall prophecy where he said, you're being recalibrated. God's recalibrating you. He even called attention to it has something to do even with your blood. And Faye and I were experimenting with eating according to our blood type. I was blown away. And it really was a recalibration. God was not finished at all with our involvement in Russia. But it's like the seed had been sown, and that was just in the ground, growing, cooking, so to speak, growing. Why did God give us 2 incredible assignments? I don't know. You'll have to ask him. So the number 56. Gary Beaton, at that time a very active member of our congregation, had gone to England, spent a day or two with some friends, and came back home. They sent him a thank you card. I think he bought him a gift, something like that. They sent him a thank you card. Thank you, Gary, for spending time in our home. And because they were in England, they bought an English stamp, put it on the letter, and sent it to him. Gary is a journalist. He journals. He tries to keep track of everything. He takes photographs of nearly everything. Talk about keeping a spiritual journal. I have never encountered anybody that comes remotely close. So he'd never seen, on it was a 56 pence stamp. There's an image of that on the screen. And he said, wow, I've never seen one of those before. So he does what he normally does. He cut the stamp out and kept it, put it in his journal. It took us some time period, but it was the first notice of a new number for us. Remember, on the property, 7.7 acres, $70,000, 77 giving units, $77,777.78 we had to raise to pay for it and give a tithe. And God said, overlapping numbers. Pay attention to overlapping numbers. I'm teaching you something out of that. This was the first one. He just took note of it. With time, not originally, with time, in the upper left-hand corner, you see this portrait profile of Queen Elizabeth. At the time that was done, and she began her reign as queen on February the 6th, 1952. At the time that Gary got this stamp, at that time period, it was 56 years she had been reigning. It was like there's a hidden 56. There's a real 50. There's an observable and easily observable 56. This was the first time, so he had no idea what 56 could remotely mean. But there was a hidden one there. You had to look for it. You had to search it out. You think God would do something like that? Absolutely. You don't find a marker on the earth, the center of Babylon. This is 539 miles from the center of the Temple Mount. Wake up, world. That stamp came from a 1953 air show. It was 55 years old at the time that he received the stamp. He just kept the stamp and took note. We went to lunch. We had lunch together a lot. It was the only time we went to a restaurant on the other side of town. We normally eat at Chili's on Clinton Highway here near the church. And I was looking for something for my computer, and we ate actually at Famous Dave's over in West Knoxville. Gary paid for that lunch. Gary keeps everything, so he kept the receipt. Now, he had seen this 56 pence stamp I don't know if you can pick it up from where you're seeing. The arrow is pointing to the table that we sat at. Can you see it from where you are? Yeah, it was table 56. What did that mean? Didn't have any idea, but it was, hey, there's a number, that's another 56. He's learned enough to pay attention that God can speak through numbers. He can speak through flowers, dreams, visions, scripture, direct utterance that he gives to you, through other people, through messages, through books, through movies. There is nothing that's not available for God to speak. He just noted, so he kept the copy of it, and he didn't tell me anything about it because we weren't discussing the number 56. But that was the second instance. Not very many weeks after that, he comes into church, and he walks in the lobby, and Louis Jolligler is there with this photograph, Cherokees preparing for war. Louis had his 56th birthday. He went to a history thing, and there was a celebrated historical artist there, and he had painted this picture, and he was selling prints. And when Louis got in line, he decided he would buy himself a birthday gift of one of those prints to give to himself. He noticed at the bottom of the print that it said this was print number 57 of 250 prints. So he found the guy who was right in front of him who got print number 56. And he goes to the guy and he said, sir, these are identical, and this happens to be my 56th birthday year. Would you mind if we swapped prints so I got the 56 and you got the 57? And the guy said, sure. So Louis is real proud of his acquisition and that it had 56, the number 56 on the bottom of it, print number 56. So he comes walking into church and he's showing everybody his print, his thing. And Gary's out there and he's going, ding. That's the third time I've seen the number 56 in a relatively short time period. So, not many weeks after that, 1 week before the election in 2008, in which Barack Obama was running against John McCain, I found this picture on the internet. So this was not November the 2nd, Sunday, November 2nd. This was Sunday, the last Sunday in October. And I just used this as a slide because I talked about that election and the ramifications, at least as far as I saw it. Gary came to me afterwards. It was the 56th election cycle. It wasn't the 56th president because we'd had a number of them that had served 2 terms. But it was the 56th election cycle for a president in our country. And he comes up to me afterwards and said, Russ, what do you know about the number 56? I, almost felt attacked. I'm teasing, but I don't know anything. Did I do something wrong? And then I put that up there. He just said, well, I've had some interesting encounters with the number 56, and I wondered if it means anything to you. It doesn't mean anything. I just saw this picture out there on the internet, and I just copied it so I could use it as a part of the message. So, I called 9 prayer meetings for November 2nd, November 3rd, November 4th for that presidential election, 3 on each day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the noon, and 1 at night. And we'd pray an hour, just pray in tongues. The meetings were held over on the other side. And there were 9 of them. The last one, obviously, was election day. And the first one, I announced that a week ahead of time. So the first one, we had prayer meeting, have had now for 9 years, prayer meetings on Sunday morning, praying in the Spirit. We had them. That was normal. But, we'd have at that point in time 10, 12 people. And in that first prayer meeting, announced the week before, saying it was the 56th presidential election, 56 people showed up. There were 56 people. I had someone come to me because that week before I had mentioned it was the 56th presidential election. They said, do you know there's 56 people? Man of faith, I said, no way. There's not 56 people here. Count again. So they went and counted again. Somebody else came to me. Pastor, there's 56 people in the room. Again, expressing my faith, that is impossible. There's not 56 people here. Count them again. So I had multiple people count, and there were 56 people. Of course, there was a lot of interest in that election. Certainly would have expected far more than we normally had on Sunday mornings for Sunday morning prayer. But 56, it's like, Oh my goodness. Gary spoke with me. He told me the other 56s. We've watched for that stacking of dates. April 18th for me. The stacking of dates is one of the languages of God. So, Gary told me there were 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. I didn't know that. So during those 3 days, those 9 prayer meetings, I did research on the number 56. My goodness. I was convinced at that time that we had an intercessory calling to pray for that election. What did it mean? That's what I thought it meant. And I believe it. I believe we were called, we were specifically fingered by God. I want you to pray for it. There were intercessors all over the United States, at a minimum, praying for that election. Do I think we were the only ones? That's not the point. No, we weren't the only ones. The point was that God was giving an example to this congregation, because I was only one of the 56 people there, that I have fingered you. I have chosen you. Are you going to do what I chose you to do? Don't worry about anybody else. Research. It was delightful. There were many things going on, but I'm just going to stay in one dimension. I found out that one of the earliest 56 circles is in Stonehenge, which is a monument of occult practices, is that it had been long ago discovered that the very first thing that was at Stonehenge was a row of circles that they are convinced had posts. And there were actually 56 of those posts, and it is called the Aubrey Circle. And with time, they've come to realize that it was a Jubilee calendar, that somehow, tracking the moon, they were able to track the sabbatical years, and they were able, with that calendar, they were able to track when the Jubilee years were. When I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, are the 56s also pointing to Israel? That was the first hint, the Aubrey Circle. There were 56 signers to the Declaration of Independence. That indicated to me, yeah, that was found first. Gary told me that because he did a little research on the number 56. By that time, it was expanding, at least inside of him. And I thought, okay, well, that verifies intercessory. We're called to pray for the nation, which we are. And so during those 3 days, where that's all we did those 9 prayer meetings. And so I had the delight, the privilege of just doing research. And somewhere in there, the question crossed my mind, okay, now what does the Bible say? God uses numbers, there's no doubt to that. I won't even try and trumpet that. And I believe the definitive source for understanding the use of numbers is you start with the Bible. Meaning, you can see their expression in the earth, and when you become convinced, and for me, it's when you see the stacking. How many does there have to be? Just 2 will work. Well, what do we have, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? Well, they just all add up more. And so somewhere along the line, when I say, okay, it's usually close to the starting point when there's a new number for me. Might God be saying something? The number 7, which is a very common number, is certainly a number God used at New Covenant. The number 21, I've talked about the class of 21 and the Russia outreaches, which so many times we saw that number. Now it's like, God, you're presenting a new number. God was recalibrating. They're all connected together. So what does the Bible reveal? It's interesting. The number 56 is found only 4 times in the Scriptures. Only 4. All 4 have to do with the rebuilding of the temple. Only once is it what I'll call a pure number, the number 56. The other 3 times, it's what I'm calling a compound number, like 956 or 2056. I call those compound numbers. Whether it's compound numbers or what I'm calling, quote unquote, the pure single number, there's only 4 instances in Scripture where it's found. They are Ezra 2:14, the children of Bigvai, 2,050 and 6. Ezra 2:22, the men of Neptopath, 50 and 6. That's the one pure number in the Bible. Ezra 2:30, the children. This is a listing of those who went back from Babylon to rebuild the temple. The children of Magbish, 156. It was like, that's an easy thing to do. Just search on quotations 56. It's simple. There's only 4 that pop up. The fourth is 1 Chronicles 9:2. And at the beginning of the chapter, it talks about the priests, Levites, and the Nethinim. They were the temple servants. And in verse 9, chapter 9, verse 9, and their brethren, according to their generations, 956. All these men were heads of the father's house in their father's houses. And those were those people who went back with the first wave of people that went out of Babylon back to Israel, and they started with rebuilding the temple. It was like, oh my goodness. God, what are you doing? Now, somewhere along the line, during those days of delightful research, last week I read the Jamie Galloway prophecy that was given to me, and in the middle of that prophecy was this paragraph. And this shall be a house of prayer, the Lord calls it, and it will be a house of prayer for all nations. Not just the nation and other countries, but it will be a house of prayer. That came to me, and I thought, that's right, in that Jamie Galloway prophecy, it mentioned the house of prayer. Now, that's a statement Jesus gave. Now, I know he did it in John chapter 2 when he cleansed the temple, and he used a variant of that toward the end of his life when he cleansed the temple again. And I should have known the answer. I didn't. I thought, I wonder where in the Bible, I'm sure he was quoting from the Old Testament. I wonder where in the Bible that statement is. I mean, I knew it was in John 2, and one of the Gospels, I knew that, but he was quoting. I wonder, I didn't know. So you just use your handy computer Bible study. I was shocked. It's Isaiah 56. It's like, this is impossible. This is nothing. Wait till you get to hear in an hour or so from now. It's like, this is unbelievable. Do you know how many books in the Bible have 56 chapters? You could argue 2. The Psalms, there's 150 Psalms, so it's got a 56. Each one of those is an individual book. It's a compendium of books, but I'll go with that. There's 56, Psalm 56. It's an independent entity of itself, but it's a conglomerate. It's okay. There's only one other book, what I'll call that one book, a single book, that has 56 plus chapters. There's only one. I didn't know that. I thought, well, maybe it's Jeremiah. There's some pretty big books. I didn't know. There's only one. And I saw it was Isaiah chapter 56, so I start reading and realize it's verse 7. Even them, it's speaking of foreigners. In the verse before, it is talking about the Gentiles. Even them, the Gentiles, I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted in my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. This property, 7.7 acres, $70,000, 77 given units, raise that money. It's chapter 56, verse 7. It's like, that verse was written, and the guys who divided them into verses, God directed that. If he can direct the center of the location of Babylon, or England, or France, or the Great Pyramid, he can direct where you put the verses. Well, God's not that involved in life. I'm sorry, you serve a very shallow God. It was stunning. It's in chapter 56. and they all relate to the temple, the building of the temple in Jerusalem. I told the story last week. I will not repeat it, of us driving the stake and all the people that came to me. The building we're going to be involved in building is the temple in Jerusalem. Right. That's when Faye said, they better not say the T word. You'll have to see the previous one to understand that. It floored me. So I asked the question in that time of study, such a delightful time. It's the glory of kings, people. We're all kings and priests unto God. That's you. To search it out, what God hides. I wonder how far NCF's property is from the Temple Mount. Now, that's not what Isaac Newton was testing. Do you understand? That is not what it was. It was significant interaction with Israel, and the date of their interaction in history, and the distance of the center part of their city or what have you, or pyramid, from the Temple Mount where the Ark of the Covenant was. So this is not a valid use of using Isaac Newton's theory. But I still ask the question. We had driven a stake out there, so you can do this. You can go to Google Earth, and you can go to the Temple Mount. You can pull it up. I'd go to the Dome of the Spirit. Actually, I'd go to the water fountain in front of the mosque that's there, because that's where I believe the temple, the first temple was. Solomon's temple was below that, but that's such a different story. But, you know, we're talking about miles, so, you know, there's a lot of room in a mile. Okay, what's the distance? I thought, well, I can do what David Flynn did. I know this is not the right way this is not what the book is about. It's a completely different premise. But anyhow, you know, it'd be interesting to find out, especially if it had something to do with 56. Wouldn't that at least catch your attention, that you might blink your eyes once or twice and just kind of blink? Could God really choose a church to do something way beyond their ability? Absolutely. Did he choose Gideon way beyond his ability? Did he choose Noah way here? I want you to take the next 100 years and build a boat. I'm going to put animals in it. It's going to rain. It's going to flood, actually, in the middle of the desert. I want you to build a boat. Would God call somebody to do that? The Bible's full of it. So here we go. The distance between the Temple Mount and NCF. It's 6,326.94 miles. I had to divide that, but that's a big number. I wonder what. So I thought, well, the number 56 is the number at hand at the moment, at least that I'm studying, so I'll just divide it by 56. It comes out to 112.98. I divided it by 55, 57, 54, 58, and it comes out to much bigger or much smaller numbers, 112. Now, at first glance, I know, well, if you're rounding, that's 113. But if you take the number just as it is, it's 112 point something. That's an interesting number. It just takes a moment to glance at that. That's 56 times 2 equals 112. Now, just hang around for maybe a half hour, and 112 is a really interesting number for this congregation. It's getting complicated. Come on, gang. We're talking about God's and the creator of the galaxies, the universe, the human body, the animals, the fish, the plants, the trees, the bugs. So we plan a trip to the Temple Mount. I think God's calling us to the Temple Mount based on all the things that I've told from last week. You have to add them to I think we're supposed to go to the Temple Mount. Well, do you have all the theology work? We didn't have any theology worked out. Well, why are you going? Well, we're going to go and pray in the Spirit and say this belongs to Jesus Christ and we believe it, and we're just going to pray in the Spirit. We're going to establish ley lines. We're going to say everything that we see, it belongs to the kingdom of God and Jesus Christ. And we don't have the theology worked out. We don't know the dates. We don't know who the Antichrist is going to be. We don't know when the second coming is going to be. We don't know if there even is going to be a rapture or not. There may not be, but We don't care at this moment. We're just saying we're a group of people who are willing to say we'll pray in the Spirit and declare this belongs to Jesus Christ. That's what the purpose of the trip was. We don't know what else to do other than we're called there, so you do what you can. So it was March 13th. We go 2009. There were 30 participants. Some of you in the room may be among those who went. And it was for intercessory prayer and not tour purposes. We didn't go to tour Israel. We did see some places of note, but that was not the fundamental purpose. The fundamental purpose was to pray in the Spirit on the Temple Mount, to anoint the Temple Mount. There's a lot of oil on the Temple Mount. We were not the first to be on the Temple Mount and anoint it with oil. There was a sea of oil. Just so many people. It was unbelievable. To apply communion elements to the Temple Mount, to fight with the weapons that God has given us, the blood of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, the body of Jesus. So to take communion, there was communion elements spilled all over. There was communion juice spilled all over and I'm sure we weren't the first. My goodness, if you follow us around, there was a trail of communion crumbs. It was it was something. To apply communion elements to the Temple Mount, to establish ley lines. In warfare, ley lines, I'll just have to say, we established ley lines. We would set up triangles and say, within this triangle, everything that's within this triangle belongs to Jesus Christ. It is the kingdom of heaven, and we declare it's His. And we established ley lines all over. To drive 12 stakes on the Temple Mount. The stake that we drove in the ground, 2006, that had Cyrus and Isaiah 45 on it, we extracted from the ground and said, I want us to drive. I took it home, cut it on my bandsaw into 12 pieces. And I said, we're going to take these pieces and we're going to put them on the Temple Mount. Now, you got to be really careful. There's Muslim guards everywhere. There's IDF soldiers. There's Muslims, and they don't want you to pray. If you even look like you're praying, you could get tossed off the route. You certainly don't bring your Bible up there. And so we're going to plant stakes in the ground. You know, what are you doing? Well, so we divided those 12 among the team, and we went and we'd go to various areas on the Temple Mount, and we'd very quietly, secretly push that stake in the ground. Isaiah 45, Cyrus. We were looking for confirmations, and we were looking for additional assignments. Those were the purposes. I have a picture of the Temple Mount if you orient your eyes for just a moment. The most obvious object is there's two platforms. This is about 32 acres. There's two platforms. There's the upper platform that has the Dome of the Rock, which for some significant time period, most people believe that is where the temple was. I think that number is drastically reducing. If you'll look to the right of the dome, kind of the back of the dome, if you move over to the right, I don't know how clear it is, on the upper platform, there's a row of columns, but in front of that row of columns, there's a small circular object, the Dome of the Spirit it's called. It's not a good photo of it. Isaac Newton believed, at least among many, that is where the Holy of Holies was, that's exactly where the temple. It is in significant alignment with the Eastern Gate. If you'll look at the bottom of the picture and you'll see the word places, and then if you'll look straight up from the word places, in the wall, that first wall, closest to the word places, you see a building, kind of a rectangular building in the wall. That's the Eastern Gate. I don't believe that's the Eastern Gate, but that's what's celebrated as the Eastern Gate. And on this particular trip, thought it was the Eastern Gate. Had all kinds of geese bumps and everything standing nearby, thinking, I'm actually standing near the Eastern Gate. And it's all boarded up. When I say boarded, cemented up, the Muslims have done that because they don't want Jesus to go through that. There's graveyards in front of it, and they're convinced no holy man would go over graves, so they're polluting it, so to speak, so that he won't come through that door. I don't believe that's the door at all. There's the lower platform. So you can see the four corners. In the back right-hand corner, there was a Roman military fortress. On the left-hand side, kind of in the middle on the left-hand side, that left-hand wall, There's a mosque. They're actually on the big platform in the front on the left-hand side. There's kind of a big area, looks like a patio. There's a huge mosque underground that has been established there. The Wailing Wall, if you will, it's on the left-hand side. If you follow that left-hand wall of the rectangle and go all the way back and then turn right, and you see an open area below it, that is the Wailing Wall. Come on, Russ. That's the Wailing Wall down in the Jewish quarter. This actually belongs to Israel, but they've given the jurisdiction over it to Jordan. That was done in the War of Independence. That's the Temple Mount. This upper left-hand corner, the front, so you're on the left-hand side, the front left-hand corner, where it appears to be a big patio. This picture shows this team of 30 of us. We were praying in the Spirit. We'd go and we'd stay there, 30 minutes to an hour. We'd look like we were just having a tourist lecture because we could have gotten tossed off. And we'd pray in the Spirit, and we'd just declare it belonged to Jesus. We went to 8 corners. We went to the 4 lower corners of the larger area, and we went to the 4 corners of the upper area, the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock is on that upper mount. The bus that hauled us around, we noticed the license plate. By now, we've learned God uses numbers, at least for New Covenant. He uses them. He stacks them. Watch for them. They're encouraging to you. They're chiefly encouragement. So our bus, this is a picture of the license plate of our bus. Do you think that was an accident? You mean God's involved even in the buses that you ride around in? Yep. Watch last week's take on 70707. On this trip, we met John. John lived in Israel. He would go to the Temple Mount every day and pray. We kind of thought, well, we're going to do what nobody else has done. John's gone every day for several years, and it was like, oh, I see. This is really big. So John, missionary over there. And this is what he taught us, the temple and Temple Mount alignments. That was brand new. We didn't really look into that. That's not what we were there for in this first trip. The Mount of Olives. Oh my goodness, the significance of the Mount of Olives. The red heifer sacrifice, the mikvah altar. Never even heard of the mikvah altar and the red heifer and what its significance was, and with temple alignment. And those were all brand new things. I was awash with, I thought I had at least a fair grasp of the Bible. I'm 70 now, so that, I thought I knew a fair amount. I was standing there on that Temple Mount as we went from place to place with John, and it was like, I don't know anything. I'm not even sure I've read the Bible. This is just outside the camp. The sacrifice Hebrews talks about, he had to be sacrificed outside the camp, a certain distance, 2,000 cubits. That's how far outside the camp. The place of crucifixion on the Mount of Olives. I'd been to Israel before. It's not the Mount of Olives. It's that place with that beautiful garden and the skull and so on. And became very clear, that's just a tourist trap. That's not where it was. It was on the Mount of Olives. The Roman guard at the cross, in order for him to see what took place, the tearing of the veil, all those things that took place, he had to be standing on the Mount of Olives where Jesus was crucified. It was like, oh my goodness. The resurrection morning, the Pater Nostra, that's a church on the Mount of Olives, possibly, more possibly. That's the place where Jesus was actually buried on the Mount of Olives. He's going to return to the Mount of Olives. So it might as well be me, Leanne Squires. We went to a small home prayer house that was in the Palestinian part of the city of David. A little bit scary. We go there, and downstairs, and here's this long intercessory room, and John and his wife, and they have this intercessory prayer chamber there, and he introduced us to a song. I played just a small portion of it this morning. Leanne Squires, it might as well be me. There's a sound coming from heaven. Come to Zion's hill. Somebody's got to answer. And her song is, the theme of it is, it might as well be me. Somebody's going to say yes to heaven's call. Might as well be me. If heaven's calling, you ought to say yes. And then, it's like you're flying high. The 56s, the Temple Mount, You're swimming. There's a reason to go back. My goodness, we just did the corners. Now we understand some things. We got to do the Mount of Olives. We got to think about alignment. We have a whole year to study it. And we came home and I'm just bubbling. Boy, this is really great. And then, you couldn't believe it. We get home. Paul Bradbury, he was the NCF youth pastor. His son, Patrick Bradbury, approximately 4 years old, drowned Sunday afternoon, June 28th. Unbelievable. We have videos of that service of Patrick climbing on his dad, just interacting with his dad. A few hours later, drowned. There's no way to explain how that impacted us. We just dropped everything, essentially, to minister to the Bradburys. A 4-year-old? We dropped everything. That was our agenda. Is our focus changed to caring for the living, comforting the grieving? It was stunning. It was a birthday party. He chased a rabbit. He hit the edge of the woods, and there was a rock slide. He slid down that rock slide, slid right into the water. It just wasn't expected. He and his wife had been on that trip. It just wasn't expected. We were invited to return for trips 2 and 3. So we spent the rest of the year doing that. Helped renovate his home. There were people in the congregation that took major roles. Renovating their home, funeral, helping them go through those first months, the stories of God's provision. But moving on. I go to Montana, or did go to Montana for a number of years, the end of January, first week of February, to snow ski. Take my grandsons, took a troop of people on a number of years. So that year, 2010, we spent the rest of 2009 helping the Bradburys, focusing on that as a congregation. That's such a hard thing. And we're getting ready in Bozeman. We're getting ready to board the airplane, and they make a change in our plane, and we're there for a much longer time period than we thought, and they suddenly flashed up, okay, here's the plane, here's where you're going to leave Bozeman. And it was flight number, you can see it on the left, it was flight number 5656. I looked at that and I said, 56. And they said it's going to be on Compass Airlines. I thought, Compass Airlines? Never heard of you. How many of you have ever heard of Compass Airlines? So, if life is like a dream, meaning if you have events in life, interpret them like if you had a dream. And those were the events, the scenes in your dream. So you start off interpreting that way. Okay, so I have a dream, and in the dream I see flying home from Bozeman on flight 5656. Okay, God, you're calling attention to 56 again. And it's Compass Airlines. Okay, Compass. You're realigning the compass to 5656. So you're saying we're supposed to return to Israel again. The Temple Mount assignment. Okay, I got it. So we planned another trip. This is among the stunners of my life. So, trip number 2, this is the second trip. It was 2010. Oh, did we have trouble choosing the date? I had trouble choosing the date. Vicki, our administrator then, she was about ready to tear my hair out in addition to her hair, because I couldn't make up my mind, when do we want the date, because there wasn't as many people going as I had hoped would want to go, because we'd just gone the year before, and I could not make up my mind. Vicki kept saying, Russ, you got to make up your mind. When is the date? Okay, Vicki, we'll do it in April. We'll do it in the middle of April. Okay, so we schedule it. Okay, here's where the trip's going to be. We let the information out. Some people signed up. And then I realized there was another couple who lived in Carolina, John and Maureen Sanger, who I really wanted to be on the trip. And they couldn't come that week. So they could come the next week. I'm going through this because this is how the date was chosen. We didn't choose the date. God did. We didn't choose it. Now, what did it look like? That's what it looked like. This phlegmatic pastor who couldn't make up his mind, this choleric administrator who was going a little berserk because he won't make up his mind, and then we set it, and then we change it. And boy, that was because people had already scheduled vacations. It wasn't easy to change. 12 members ended up. We were going to focus on, because all the things we learned from John, we were going to focus on the Ezekiel 40, 41, 42, 43 passage where Ezekiel was taken by the Spirit and to a hill overlooking the Temple Mount, and this being, angel, showed him the temple, this Ezekiel's temple, and all of its dimensions. And so we studied that in some detail. We had what we thought was the location of the temple, where the dome of the Spirit, where the Holy of Holies was. We bought a pretty good, pretty expensive GPS device. Now, you can't go marching up on the Temple Mount with this big GPS thing and, that you can look at and all of that kind of stuff. You got to do a real small one. So Rusty Ortner went with us, and he got brushed up on GPS, and so we had it figured out, and he would go up on the Temple Mount, and he'd do GPSs, and he'd make markers, and he'd go till he got the front and the back and the sides, and they were the right distance apart, so to speak. Using the GPS, we set up the coordinates. So we had enough people to do the boundaries of the building and because you're only using 12 people and a line of people pointing to the eastern gate, and we were just going to pray that. Well, now that's a feat, because you're standing there in formation, and you can't just do that. There's a guard station right next to the dome of the Spirit. So we do it. That was our intention, to focus on the Ezekiel 40 and future temple, its location and alignment, the red heifer altar, the Mount of Olives, and we didn't even know about that before, so we knew about how many feet it was based on a day's journey, what was a Sabbath day's journey, and so we used GPS. We were marching all over the Mount of Olives. We found an area we think this is where the mikvah altar was. Maybe not. It's in Arabs. The Arabs own that. That's all part of the West Bank. And we had a little trouble getting in there and tramping around and doing GPS, and it was an interesting trip. And we had a committed intercessory prayer team at home. And while we were on the Temple Mount, they were here in the building at the exact same time. But for them, it was 2 and 3 in the morning. For us, it was early in the morning over there. So they were here. So we were synchronized together. They were doing the same thing we were doing, closer together. They could have their Bibles. They could read. And it so worked out because of the days that we were there. The first morning we were on the Temple Mount, standing in formation of Ezekiel's temple. It was April the 28th. I've told you how we got there on that date. It was April the 28th. So we go through all the things that we'd planned. We get back to the room. Rusty Ortner and I were rooming together, and he gets a text from Paul Bradbury. He said something like, "Hey, something interesting happened." So while we were on the Temple Mount, it was night for them. They were here. And Paul said, they can't take their Bibles where they are, but we can. And Paul would read a different version of the Bible every 2 years just because that's what he chose to do. And at that time, he was reading the New Living Translation. He said, "I'm going to read out of the New Living Translation." And it takes our dates. Normally, you're used to in the Bible the Hebrew calendar dates or months or so on. And the New Living Translation changes them into dates we're more familiar with. So he starts reading. So they're in this room, and Paul is reading this. And it starts, Ezekiel 40 in the New Living Translation says, on April 28th. And when Rusty Ortner said, "Hey, look at this." Paul was telling in that intercessory prayer meeting that they found out that that Ezekiel thing in the Bible happened on April 28th. No, it didn't. There is no way. There's no way. That doesn't happen. On April 28th, during the 25th year of our captivity, 14 years after the fall of Jerusalem, the Lord took hold of me. In a vision from God, He took me to the land of Israel, and He set me down on a very high mountain. From there I could see toward the south what appeared to be a city. As He brought to me near, I saw a man whose face shone like a bronze, standing beside a gateway entrance. It was the eastern gate of the Temple Mount. He was holding in his hand a linen measuring cord and a measuring rod. He said to me, "Son of man, watch and listen. Pay close attention to everything I show you. You have been brought here so I can show you many things. Then you will return to the people of Israel and tell them everything you have seen." New Living Translation. Pay attention to the things that God shows you. So I start going through my what are the odds calendar. What are the odds that you would be on April 28th on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? You could have been in any city of the world. You could say, well, just limit it to Israel. You could have been in hundreds of places in Israel. You could have been anywhere on April the 28th. But not only were you in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, you were standing in formation trying to approximate Ezekiel's temple using GPS, so you were reasonably accurate within the system you were using. You may have been totally wrong, but within the system you were using, you had a good conscience. We're trying to do this reasonably accurately. We're not saying this is definitively the way it was. That you're standing there, and it's the same day of a 365 calendar in the same city, in the same location, in Ezekiel's temple's formation. There are no odds. There's none. You cannot generate a number big enough. It's like God said, He takes His finger, says, I know where you are. I know when you're there. I know when Babylon was destroyed. I know when Israel was taken captive. I know how far the Great Pyramid is from this. It's nothing for Him to say, you're going to be there on April the 28th. What you know is, Russ, would you please make a decision when we're supposed to go to Israel this time? I can't. I just can't. Well, now we want to change it. So we know those circumstances. I'd love to know the angelic encounters with us as we're going through those. But just take your time. I think my angel friend Fred, it's not a real angel, I call him Fred. I think he's just telling me, just take your time, Russ. It's no problem. You'll eventually come up with the date. Vicky doesn't buy that, but there are no odds. I heard myself say over and over again, this doesn't happen. This does not happen to people. It just doesn't happen, but it is happening. I'm saying that God revealed Himself in His sovereign ways in such stunning and unmistakable ways. He was trying to awaken a people. Hey, I've picked you. I've picked the property you're on. I've picked you. Not because you're better or more. It's just because I've picked you. Like He picked Gideon. I picked you. Who, me? I'm the least of the smallest. I'm hiding out from the Midianite. I know, but you were picked. I picked Moses. He just picks. He's God. He has the right to pick. It was unbelievable. We were swept with it. I almost couldn't speak for 2 days. It was like, I can't even talk. It just doesn't happen. Okay? On that trip, Vicki wanted to visit the Herva Synagogue. There's a picture of the Herva Synagogue. She would tell me, I'd like to go there. They've just opened it. They're going to make it available to tourists. Vicki, I don't want to go to the Herva Synagogue. I'm here for the Temple Mount, not the Herva Synagogue. It's considered the greatest synagogue in all of Jerusalem. It was destroyed. There was a prophecy of old that after it was built, that it would be destroyed twice and rebuilt. After it was rebuilt for the third time, built first, destroyed, built again, destroyed, built again. After it was built for the third time, then the next building they would build would be the temple on the Temple Mount. Prophecy of old, many, many, many years ago. It was first built and destroyed in 1720 when you had some of the earliest immigrants Jews coming back to Jerusalem. They borrowed money. They couldn't pay the money back. Their debtors destroyed the temple. That's what they built with the money they borrowed. It was built again then in 1948. The Jordanian soldiers at the beginning of the War of Liberation, where they got Jerusalem back, as one of their parting acts, the Jordanian soldiers destroyed the Herva Synagogue. It was rebuilt again, and it was finished. It was completed on March the 15th. Now remember, we were there on April 28th. That was our second day there. 2010. We were there April. All they permitted was dignitaries and Jewish Orthodox and so on. They didn't permit tourists. And Vicki kept telling me, Russ, I'd like us to visit the Herva Synagogue. I don't want to visit the Herva Synagogue. I'm just not interested. We're here to focus on the Temple Mount. I really think we ought to do this. Okay, Vicki, okay. Look into it. She discovered, hey, if you get there early in the morning, the tours. So we arrive. I'm the reluctant one. Vicki's bright-eyed, and we walk up the steps, and the guide comes out of the building, and he said, oh, my. He said, do you know that today is the first day the Herva Synagogue is open to tourists, and you are among the very first tourists to come into this building? I'm looking, dag nabbit, she was right. We're among the first. He kept saying to us, you're among the very first tourists to see this building. So we went through the building. You can see this little, if the scene is still up there, you can see that balcony up around the top around it. Great view of Jerusalem, the old city. And so we went up there, went through it, and it was like, when that building is finished, then the next one that gets built is the temple on the Temple Mount. It's like, God, you are... So, another unusual thing. After I got back, I was having a long, detailed conversation with Gary over lunch, and he recorded everything. I told you he took pictures of everything. He saved everything. He was recording it. And when he got home, he said, hey, I looked at my BlackBerry recorder of the recording I made of our lunch, and when you were telling me about all of this kind of stuff, and he said, I noticed that it was, see it there? You can see it's got Russ and Gary lunch notes. It was 56 minutes and 56 seconds. Now, I was there when he just beep, turned it on, and we were finished. He goes, beep, turned it off. You know how hard it is to hit 56, 56? You have 1 second. You only have 1 second. Well, it's a coincidence. Yeah, okay. I don't live on that street anymore. I don't live in that city anymore. God gives me experiences like this. We live on Tolson Lane, Knoxville, Tennessee, and our neighbor across the street wanted to erect a cell phone tower in some vacant part of her property that was right next to her house, and it was right out our front window. So 150 feet from our front window would be this ugly cell phone tower. The neighbors at the top of the hill, their house was facing down. Mine was facing Fay, and our house is facing Tolson Lane. Theirs was at the top of the Tolson Lane, so theirs was facing down, so a little bit longer away, but their living room, they'd look out at this cell phone tower. Oh, there was a massive letters and MPC, Metropolitan Planning Commission, and they hired a high-class mover, shaker, lawyer, and we had this big meeting eventually in front of the Metropolitan Planning Commission. It took place on Thursday, August the 12th, 2010. So there we are. I'd never been to an MPC meeting, and they explained the rules. Here's the way the rules are. Because there were many things they heard that day. The rules are each side has 5 minutes. When your 5 minutes is up, you're done. The other side, for whatever the issue was, property disputes, tax disputes, you name it. So there were several things that were taking place, and I saw pretty quickly, things happened pretty quickly here. So it came our turn. The neighbors at the top of the hill had hired a lawyer. So the other side presented their material, and it seemed like, oh man, it's a slam dunk. The Metropolitan Planning Commission had been approving cell phone towers all over the city. Their record is they approve cell phone towers. We're moving into the cell phone era. They got to exist. We just approve them. That's just the way it is. It just seemed hopeless. Our lawyer stood up. He took about 3.5 minutes. As far as I was concerned, okay. And then one of the other neighbors got up and talked a minute. I forget, I didn't time it down. There was like 45 seconds left. And I was to be the third speaker. I can't even get my name out in 45 seconds. You understand? Those of you here are real familiar with that. And so I said to the person in front of me, to the gal who lived at the top of the hill, there's only 45 seconds. There's not enough time. Just pass me over. Get up there and you tell them. There's just not enough time. Do it, Russ, do it. Tell them. I'm trying to paint the way it really was and how reluctant I was. I wasn't a man of faith and power just saying, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to tell them like it is. I was forced to go. 45 seconds left. So I come up to the podium, said, my name is Russell Allen Porcella, and I live at 4337 Tolson Lane, and my house will face that cell phone tower if it's put up. And they rewound the clock. They ran it back and put 5 minutes on it. Now, we'd been there a while. We'd never seen that. And they all sat there listening like it was the most anointed message I'd ever given. And you stand outside and you're watching yourself and you realize, that's not me. I didn't do that much study. Boy, that's an interesting point. I didn't even know that, and I just said that. Wow, I better take notes on what I said in this message. They're listening. They put their papers down. And I don't know any other way to say it. God walked in the room. Do you mean the Lord Jesus manifested himself? No, that's not what I mean. God walked in the room. When God walks in the room, everything changes. It just changes. God walked in the room. One of the 12 on the MPC, he said, I always approve these cell phone towers, but I'm not sure about this one. When I sat down, I thought, oh my goodness. They had a little dialogue. They called the other lawyer back up and the expert. There was a cell phone tower expert. And we watched. People are convinced. They winked at each other, the expert with the lawyer, the hotshot lawyer. And eventually, someone on the commission said, are you demanding that we make a ruling today? And the lawyer, they were so sure that they had it in their pocket. Yes, we want a ruling today. So they ruled 8 against it and 4 for it. So they said no. When God walks in the room, time changes. People make decisions they never make. Things that are a slam dunk are not a slam dunk anymore because God walks in the room. The cell phone tower is not there. There's more to the story, but I'll just have to leave that. They were stunners. We were helping the man that we were going to take the third trip that year, and Ray Hughes, and we went up to help him. And he took us to dinner at a very old, antiquated restaurant, and on the wall was this picture of a guy, Bill Monroe. I didn't know who Bill Monroe was. He kind of bluegrass music, kind of the father of bluegrass music. And he was telling us, he recorded a song back in 1954. It says, "I'm working on a building." He was working on the temple. That's what the song was about, working on the temple for the Lord. It's a very unusual song. I'm not going to play it. If you want something interesting to do, just go to YouTube and just look up Bill Monroe and working on a building. You'll hear an interesting song. But the point was, we were sitting in there, we were seeing this. Gary took this picture. And it was 56 years at that time that we were in that restaurant looking at that picture. It was 56 years working on a building. The temple. That's what the song is about, working on a building. Temple Mount number 3. We had that Bible thing. You don't even get those in your life, much less 2 of them. Unless God is trying to scream at us, "Hey, wake up." So here we go. It was an October the 17th trip. That was the day it began. We didn't pick that date. Ray Hughes did. He was a musicologist, and he was trying to put together 2 teams. He was trying to put together a worship team that would go underneath the Temple Mount and all those caverns that are under the Temple Mount, and an intercessory team on top of the Temple Mount. That was us praying in the Spirit on the Temple Mount while underneath worship was going on, and what was in his heart was that combined worship and intercession force underneath and on top of the Temple Mount. Sounded like a great idea. He picked the date. We didn't pick the date. Ray Hughes picked the date. Worship team below, intercessors up on. Kathy Grizel, we were in a prayer meeting sometime during the summer, praying into that event that was going to take place. And while she was sitting there, she felt like God spoke to her, prompted her, "I want you to go read the book of Haggai." And Kathy told me that she said, the book of Haggai. I'm not sure where that is. I think it's in the Bible. I'm not sure where in the Bible it is. I wonder if Paul is here. Paul was there. I wonder if he brought we referred to his Bible, the New Living Translation, as a funny Bible. I wonder if Paul's got his funny Bible. And just read. She didn't know where it was, how many chapters, what it was about. Just go get the book of Haggai. So she comes up, borrows Paul's Bible. The book is about rebuilding the temple. I've entitled this, "Where's the 56?" The book is about rebuilding the temple. It only has 2 chapters. And she was looking in the New Living Translation. Actually, the book revolves around 4 prophecies. Just read it. There's 4 prophecies. They had begun to build, and they stopped. Now, years had gone by, and God sends prophets to stir up Zerubbabel and Joshua the priest, the high priest, to get back at it. You're not doing what I asked you to do. Get going on it again. That's what the book is about. October 17th was the date of the 3rd prophecy. Reading it out of the New Living Translation, it's like, this doesn't happen where you line up over the Bible. This is the Bible now we're talking about. It just doesn't happen. This is twice this year. October 17th is the 3rd prophecy. Here it is, this is part of the 3rd prophecy. "The future glory of this temple will be greater than its past glory, says the Lord of heaven's armies. And in its place I will bring peace, says the Lord of heaven's armies." The Lord of heaven's armies has spoken. That's a part of the 3rd prophecy. Haggai, the New Living Translation, said it was October the 17th. That's when this trip started. It's like, this does not happen. So I say, okay, where's the 56? There's not 56 chapters. What, you know. Doesn't mean there had to be a 56 in there, but wow, there was such things going on that, okay, where's the 56 in this book? So we search. The first number one prophecy is in Haggai chapter 1, verse 1. And the date given in the New Living Translation is August 29. The second one is in chapter 1, verse 15. And the date given is September the 21st, was the second prophecy. Haggai chapter 2, verse 1, and the date given is October 17th. That was the date of the third trip that Ray Hughes chose. The third prophecy, Haggai 2:10, which was the fourth and final prophecy, it was given on December the 18th. Okay, there's not 56 verses. Where in the world, is there a 56? Where's the 56? So just kind of looking at that information, it's the glory of kings. We're all kings and priests because of what Jesus has done. It's the glory of kings to search out a matter. Okay, where is it? Is it there? So, it's hidden in the details. It is there. It's just hidden. You got to find it. You have to desire it. You have to be convinced God's bigger than the little box that I have put him in. He's so much bigger. He's so much more involved in our lives. These are Bible-type stories. They're impossible. So if there's 3 days left in August, so you started on August 29, one of the ways looking at it. There's 3 days left in August. September has 30 days. October, forgetting the day that it was on, I first counted between the days and thought, maybe there's 56 there. No, there wasn't any 56 there. Between the 1st and the October 17th is 50 days, not 56. So then I said, okay, there's 3 days, there's 30 days in September, there's 31 days in October, there's 30 days in November, there's 18 days used up of December. That's 112 days. Ooh. I've seen that number before. I know what that is. That's 56 times 2. Do you think God did that because he knew there would be a congregation in Knoxville, Tennessee, that they would figure out their distance from the Temple Mount using a book for purposes that it was not intended for, that if you divide the number of miles of 6,000 miles by 56, you'll come out to 112. Because he wanted you to be so sure. This is God. God's done this. This is not our idea. We just haven't sat around in a group thinking, what could we do? Maybe we could do this. That sounds like a good idea. We'll do that. 100, that's 56 times 2. But we've run into 112 before. That's like, I've picked you. He says it again. I've picked you. But that's in the Bible, and that's... I'm trying to play out the emotions that I found myself struggling through and almost trying to resist. It can't be. It just can't be. People don't even have one of these in their lifetime. We get 2 in 1 year. Just maybe God's trying to convince with these sovereign experiences, I've chosen you. I have chosen you. Just accept it. What's the meaning? 2 Temple Mount matches with the scripture text, unheard of. I've never heard anybody give a testimony with a match. I'm sure they exist for other things. I'm sure it does. I've just never heard one. Stunners, to say the least. The 56 calling absolutely includes the Temple Mount and the temple for NCF, in addition to an intercessory prayer call for the United States. there definitely has been a recalibration via the Jim Gall. Russia recalibrated to Israel. Then there was trouble. I think I say trouble in River City. There was trouble in River City. If you've seen The Music Man, that means something to you. If not, don't worry about it. In addition to Patrick's, there were multiple deaths. People were unhappy. People were leaving NCF. Some key people had different ideas of what we should focus on, what we should do, what kind of ministry should we have, should we build a building or not, how we should spend our money, whether we should have staff, how we should position ourselves. People had ideas. It's like God has ideas. You're much better off following God's ideas. People were unhappy. Oh, we heard not being fed. I'm just not being fed. I heard one person say, if he even says the word Russia again, I'm walking out the door. Don't want to hear about Israel. Don't want to hear about Russia. All this Russia and Israel mission stuff is just not relevant to me. I've got kids to raise. I've got a spouse that I need to interact with and have peace and harmony in our home. And I frankly don't care about the number 56. I'm not sure I even want to hear that again in my life. It does not affect me at all. It's not relevant to me. I did a terrible job of communicating how relevant it was. I just didn't do well. I assumed the responsibility. For some, they just frankly weren't supposed to be here. For purposes, reasons known to God, they were not to be included. Just like 32,000 people showed up to march with Gideon, only 300 had been chosen. If you're afraid, hey, go home. If these things scare you, go home. That's what he said. 20,000 left. If you conduct yourself in such a manner that it appears like you're just not as attentive as you need to be, you're just not attentive the way you lap water, the way you look. But they're not the ones he chose. There was only 300. It was down to 300. Some of them, they weren't supposed to be here. It wasn't what their assignment was. Some of them absolutely are still supposed to be here. And we've suffered loss. And they have. Because they were supposed to be a part. It was a terrible time. Boy, I heard, it's just not relevant, Russ. This stuff is just not relevant. I didn't do a good job of communicating. I didn't do a good job of making it clear. I didn't retell the stories that had so convinced me. There were so many things that I didn't do well. 2011, it was a dark and discouraging time. 2011, we were reducing rapidly. Our general fund was going way down. Our budget each year was decreasing. March of 2011, March and a few ladies went to a Katie Sousa. A couple of our gals had been to a Katie Sousa conference earlier, and they said, she's worth listening to. Faye went. It was an astounding impact that it had on Faye and the ladies that went. We hear about the healing of soul wounds, the blood of Jesus, and we start going for it. We start having soaking services. We start listening to Katie Sousa stuff. Faye's major impacted. We and I host Wednesday nights, soaking. Still, there was major unhappiness. And I called from May 31st to July 10th. This was 2011. It was getting desperate. And we need a 40-day fast. I just was impressed to do it. And in my life, I've done a number of fasts. I'd never done a 40-day water fast. I'd only done one other 40-day fast. One other time I did a significant water fast, but nothing close to a 40-day. And I just felt I need to do a water fast. And so many people participated. People told me their stories, how they participated in the fast. It went May 31st to July 10th, 2011. Serious participation by many. I did a water fast. At the 22nd day of the 40-day fast, this huge windstorm hits Knoxville, and there's this shearing wind, horizontal shearing wind, that instead of a tornado that's like vertical, it was sideways, and it comes across the front of the property, and it levels, cuts in half our sign, the wood sign that's out there. It's made of mahogany, that's straight grain wood. And right in the middle of the sign, between the words New Covenant and the word Fellowship, it gets cut right in half. It's just virtually a straight line. So half of the sign is on the ground. The bottom part is connected to the pillar posts, the two posts that are down in the ground. We didn't know that one of them was rotted completely off. That vertical thing goes at the angle, and it knocks down one of the trees in the front yard of this big maple tree in the front yard of the house right next to us. There were two of these about 20 feet away from each other. It essentially doesn't touch one of the trees and levels, knocked down all kinds of trees in the backyard of this man. So during the fast, what we did is we went and helped our neighbors. We cut them down. That was hard to do, significant fast, chainsaws, but we were trying to help our neighbor. It was incredibly specific. It's like, oh my goodness. "40 days after the fast, we were painting the sanctuary. We were spreading compost, mulch on the flower beds outside late in the afternoon. I'd painted in the sanctuary. I'd painted the front. And I saw a couple outside. They were actually using my car and my trailer. I said, I'm going to go help them. And I went into the back of the trailer, and I started shoveling the mulch. It was very loose. It wasn't clay. It wasn't rock. It was mulch we had just picked up the day before. It was simple shoveling, and I was shoveling the mulch into this small wheelbarrow, and I shoveled 2 or 3. It was a little wheelbarrow, and he'd come back for another load. I took 1 or 2 shovels, and I don't remember the rest. There were 3 or 4 people there, and they saw it happen. They said, I backed up, I hit the small railing of this trailer, I pirouetted backwards, fell backwards, and fell straight on my head on the asphalt. Knocked myself out, injured my brain stem. 2 doctors said I should have died. I just couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. When you have experiences like I've just told you, and there you are, 5 months I was out, workers' comp, 5 months. Further problems. I mean, you just can't. That's real hard on a congregation. It's real hard. Really key people left during that time period. It's hard. September 16th, after the fast, a semi trying to turn around in our driveway rolls over the stone pillar, which was a monument to that God gave us this property. There's 77 stones standing for the 77 giving units that God used to pay for the property. It was just like the children of Israel. They built a pillar saying it was a monument to God in the middle of the river and on the edge, so they could teach their children years to come. See that pillar? That celebrates when God opened the Jordan, and we walked through, and our ancestors started to occupy this land and went to Jericho and won the Battle of Jericho. That's what that pillar means. It's a memorial. And a semi drives over it and crushes it. And our sign is half broken off, and I'm out of commission, should have been dead. I've titled this Some of This and Some of That because that was the sum of this, and that wasn't very good. It wasn't a lot of fun. I mean, when you have the callings that God, when He fingers you, you're going to get tested. There's going to be problems. You just don't walk around and God's saying, I have chosen a rather stretching assignment for you. It's one that you'll be glad to talk about in heaven. Yeah, God just picked us and then He enabled us and He made things work together and we just happened to be on the train and we were there when it took place and people think we had something to do with it. Really we didn't. We were just on for the ride. He just said, I'm going to let you take this particular ride. And, well, such and such took place. God used you to awaken the sleeping giant in Russia, the start of the global end-time harvest. Well, yeah, but that's just because He chose us, that's all. How many people have been involved in preparing and through the years and all the prophecies and all the planning of God for centuries? I mean, you got to take all those people into consideration. You just have to take all that into consideration. Yeah, but He gave you to be the privilege to be there to throw the switch. Well, yes, I believe He has. You think you're just going to waltz into those kinds of assignments or to be involved in the rebuilding of the temple? I mean, the temple in Israel, the hot spot of the whole world? You think that's not going to be contested? We've got problems. You know, sometimes you have this theology. If you got problems, you can't be right. There's got to be problems. And on the other days, you can have this theology. Because we have problems, that means we're doing something right because we have problems. Because otherwise we wouldn't have problems, but it's because we're doing something right. So it depends which day of the week, you know, which one you hold to for yourself. So here we are today. If you were here this morning, I want this on the tape. I apologize. So 3 days after the fast, I have put here a 2-foot piece of my shattered Isaiah 45 staff was returned to me. This is the 2-foot piece. This was given to me. 3 days after the fast. Let me go through these pictures quickly. In Ukraine, it is believed that the Apostle Andrew visited Ukraine after Jesus ascended into heaven. This is a statue in Kiev of supposedly the Apostle Andrew and his staff. A leading pastor in all of Ukraine told me personally, it's on film, it's actually on some of our videos of the prophetic calling on Russia, told me, yes, all of Ukraine believes that the Apostle Andrew came there years and years ago. And he took his staff and he put his staff on the ground and he made 2 prophecies. He said, all of Ukraine believes this. He said that here there's going to be a major city, and it has come into being. It's Kiev, the capital. And from this point, the light of the gospel is going to start, and it's going to go over the whole world. It's going to begin here. So this is, some of their money has this statue on it. Andrew, real important in Ukraine. I don't know whether that happened or not. This is the church. This is St. Andrew's Church in Kiev, Ukraine. Supposedly on the spot, on the mountain where he tunked his staff down and said, from this spot, it's going to be a great city, and from this spot, there's going to be a revival. The light of the gospel of Jesus Christ is going to emanate from here around the whole world. So when we took a trip there in 2006, I took a staff. It was this staff. I took a staff. Actually, a member of the congregation, Dolly Sauls, came to me, and it was in her heart to take this staff and to take it. And we would go and visit this church, and we would tunk this staff that God gave. It's in Isaiah 45. It had Isaiah 45 verses 1, 2, and 3 printed on it, burned on it, wood burned on it, and tunk it on the ground. Are we saying that was the spot that Andrew went? No, but it's okay. God knows what we're trying to do. He's big enough to cover it. So sometimes when you have a lot of time, sit and talk with Dolly. Ask her about the journey of taking this staff on all the different airlines, go through all the different customs and security, And she got it there, and she got it back, and she fought battle after battle after battle. One of the major battles took place right there at that church. The guy who was the priest, he didn't want her to bring that stick up those stairs. A lot of stairs going up because this was a little bit of a rise, a hill. I don't know how Dolly did it, God. So this is Dolly and I, this is the stick. And she has marvelous stories. So here I am up where the top of the thing, she did it. She got the guy to acquiesce. She gets it up, she gives me my staff, and I tunk it on the ground. And God, whether it's from this spot or not, the revival is going to spread from Ukraine, Russian-speaking people, Slavics, the whole world. And I just want to lend my faith that you've called the Russian-speaking people, because we'd spend 6 months producing a DVD of the prophetic call on the Russian-speaking people, and that from Russia, the great end-time harvest is going, Russian-speaking former Soviet Union nations, which Ukraine's one of them, that from there, it's going to spread to Europe, Hudson Taylor said, and from Europe, it's going to spread to the whole world. The end-time global harvest. God's picked Russians. So I was just there to agree. We were there. Everybody was there. Dolly, who fought the fight to get this stick there. We agreed. I was just saying, God, we agree. Whoever you've picked, that's the right choice. Whether this is the spot that Andrew tunked, whether he even made it up here or not, I don't know. But we just lend our agreement. That you've chosen to pick the former Soviet Union, Russian, Slavic people, so be it. That's who you've picked. It's the right choice. We're just there to lend agreement. God did, through us, through this congregation, release a prophetic DVD of the prophetic calling on Russian-speaking people that is all over the former Soviet Union. I'm told regularly by one of us who is living in Russia, Ukraine right now. She said, you're a rock star in Russia. I'm not a rock star, Amanda. Yes, you are. You're known all over Russia in the churches. Why? Well, because of the DVD. It's very possible because that was released in Kiev, Ukraine. That's where it was released. It's like a seed that got put in the ground. So, the staff. So we came home, we gave a team report. We got home on a Monday, we gave the team report that Sunday and that Sunday night. And I had purchased symbolically a hammer when I was over there. You have to go to one of the earliest tapes to get the significance of that. And while we were there in Ukraine, we'd gotten some stones because I had the hammer from out of the scripture that will burn and it'll crush the rock. So we had a service in a small village where we put a bunch of rocks up on the platform and people took this hammer and whacked those stones and broke them all. It's like, oh my. They went after it. I mean, we'd played the video, the prophetic calling on Russian-speaking people. They heard Bob Jones say it's going to start with Ukraine. But they'd known that from what everybody in Ukraine believes. So when I came home, we came home with a hammer that's downstairs and my staff. And we had a prayer tunnel, we had testimonies, and I said to the people, okay, when you go through the prayer tunnel, if you want, we put them on the platform over here. There's my staff that we took, and the hammer, tunked the staff on the ground or pounded on the platform. Take the hammer, pound it on the platform. So a number of people did. And the staff started to break. And I remember thinking, oh my. And it got shattered. Now, I invited people to do that. I invited people to slam the hammer, knock it against the platform, the hammer, the staff, or tunk it on the floor. But I didn't anticipate what took place. I was dismayed. There were people who were watching me and watching what was taking place, and they interpreted, he's dismayed, or he's bothered, or he's troubled. I was all of those. I couldn't believe it. The price that was paid to take that staff over there. I was so troubled. I didn't pay attention. And somebody went over, Gary Beaton went over, but he wasn't the first, he actually was the second. He went over, and of all the pieces that were left, he took the biggest one. He took this piece. All the rest were smaller splinters. He didn't know that somebody else had already gone and had selected what was the biggest piece. This was the next biggest piece. God knows the right time. The right time is not always the time that you would pick. Romans 8:28 says, and God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. I don't believe it's just an automatic. To those who love God and are called according to his purpose. 5 years passed. It was 2006, April 2006, that the staff was splintered. At the end, there was a bigger piece that was taken. I didn't know that. There was this piece that was taken. I didn't know that. The rest of it was splinters on the platform. They were thrown away. What does this mean? This was back in 2006, and we had some glorious days. I've told you about some of them. So after the 40-day fast, it's like God says, hey, I'm still here. Things are really tough right now, but I'm still here. Everything's on. So Gary Beaton, who took it, held on to it, kept it in his car. 5 years. After the 40-day fast, we went out to begin to break the fast, buttermilk, at one of the local restaurants. He said, hey, I have something for you. I've held on to it, and I feel like God's finally prompted me to give it back to you. Okay. So we left the restaurant, went outside, and he opened his trunk, and my stick. That's a part of my stick. Where did you get that? He said, well, I got it the night that it was broken. He was on the trip. He went to Ukraine. He was there the night of the report. He said he was grieved over what he saw. And he said, I went up and I got the biggest piece that I could find. I felt prompted to, and I felt I was to wait until I was prompted to give it back to you. There is a day. Timing. God uses timing. There's a day when we will flip the switch in Russia. There's a day. God has so taught me, there's a day. When he's doing something, there's a day. You've heard those stories. That's why my desire is that you hear all the stories on all the DVDs. There's a day. So 3 days after this, what I would call more of a desperation fast, there's so many problems, and it got worse. I've told you those things. But 3 days after the fast, I get this, and I think, wow, that's an encouragement to me. It just has small pieces of the Isaiah text, Isaiah 45, verses 1 through 3. But it was something, I didn't think there was anything. I thought it was all thrown away. And wow. So I've just kept it in my office. It was 5 years. It was 2011, 3 days after the 40-day fast. So this week, that just passed. It's Yom Kippur, the most holy day of the year to the Hebrews, the Jews. The most holy day. It's a fast day. On our calendar, it starts Tuesday evening and sundown, goes through Wednesday at sundown. Evening and morning. Day, evening and the day. And I get a call on Wednesday of last week. It was the day part of Yom Kippur. And there's a gal on the other end, and she said, Pastor Russ, I have a gift for you. I don't know where you are. Are you at your home, at the church? Actually, I'm at the doctor's office with Faye's mom, and I'll be at the church when it's over. Okay, I have something I want to give you. Okay, so she called again around 11 o'clock, 11:15, And is this a good time for me to come? Actually, I got to leave in 7 minutes because I got a lunch at 11:30, but I'll be here in the afternoon. Okay. What I didn't tell when I've told this story before, when this stick was given to me, there was an appointment made to give me the stick, actually 2 of them, and it had to be canceled. Then there was another appointment made on another day by the person who made the stick and gave it to me, and they couldn't make the second time. And they made a third appointment, and on the third day, they brought 2 sticks to me that they had made that have Isaiah 45. One is a closet rod from a local building supply store, and this one was one gotten out in the wild. So that was noteworthy to me. Okay, there's an overlap here, because I know this person 3 times. They had to make 3 appointments to give the gift. The person who made the stick, C.J. Linebarger, who made the stick, 3 appointments to bring it. And oh my, that Gary Beaton told that story when he did a session several weeks ago. So this gal comes into my office finally, and she walks in and she's had something behind her back. So she came in like this, and oh, I see you have something behind your back. Yeah, it has to do with Isaiah 45. Okay, that's good. Now this is 9 years and 5 months. 9 years and 5 months. And she pulls this out and says, I have this. And I go, that's my stick. Where did you get that? So, well, I was there the night that it was shattered. I saw your face. So when I could, I went up and got the biggest piece. Well, where's it been? In my garage. You've had this in your garage for 9 years and 5 months. Yeah. It's been there so long I forgot where I got it. You forgot? Yeah. I think one of God's angels went and took an eraser and did a little erasing in her brain. I'm teasing, but I'm not teasing. I think it could go just like that. They disconnect, they take the chemical that's needed between the 2 nerves so the synapse takes place, so the connection can take place. I think they just blow on it, dry up the chemical, speaking in biology terms, and they can't pass the signal. A couple years ago, she said, we cleaned our garage. My husband said, just throw that stick away. It's been there for years. No, I think I'm going to make a walking stick out of it and take it to Israel because it's got the word Israel on the bottom, and I think I'll make a walking stick. Okay. So last Sunday night, late at night, 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning, she's watching the Gary Beaton, catching up on him, watching the Gary Beaton thing, and he talks about the 2 sticks, and she thinks, the stick in my garage, the stick. So she goes out and looks and starts reading it, and I had read in one of the sessions the Isaiah 45 passage, and she reads this and says, what, that's out of Isaiah 45. She looks it up and she says, this is Pastor Russ's stick. So this is Monday, real early Monday morning of last week, and she knows, Tuesday night and Wednesday is Yom Kippur. I think I'll give it to him on Yom Kippur. I'll give it back to him. I know why she gave it that day. Because Fred, the angel, was there whispering, wait till Wednesday. Give it to him on Wednesday. Oh yeah, I think I'll give it to him on Wednesday. Do you think it really happens that way? Of course I do. It could be the Holy Spirit inside of you bubbling up. Could be the angels ministering to the heirs of salvation. God's communication system. So she comes in and she gives this to me. And I go and I get the other piece. I said, I've got this other piece. And so I start fooling with the 2 pieces, and I realize why they match. That's where this piece was broken. It's right there.
Now, it's been apart 9 years, you understand, 5 months. I said, and you can read it. And this says, I will give. And this says, you, the treasures of darkness, hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, the Lord, who call you by your name, am the God of Israel. And over the next several days, I come to realize, God, if you were trying to tell someone you're going to return something to them or something that's been hidden in darkness for a long time, how might you do that? Well, I got a suggestion. Why don't you give back to them something that says that so clearly that they can't miss it? They can, well, it doesn't mean that. It's so clear that they can't miss it. And he can make something good out of something that when you were watching it take place, this is not good. And it wasn't. But God causes all things to work together for good. The tone of that passage is even things that are hard. 9 years, 5 months. Things hidden. It is part of our calling in waking up a sleeping giant, is to bring to the light things that have been hidden a long time. This is Isaiah 45:3. I will give you the treasures of darkness, plural, and hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, the Lord, who call you by my name, by your name. Remember, God showed me that he's the one who gave me my name in Russia, Hotel Rus. Oh, so this has to do with Russia. No, it has to do with the global end-time harvest. Well, I'm interested in evangelism. Well, why don't you join us? No, it's evangelism. That's what I'm really into. That's what turns my crank. Well, why don't you try this one on? Have the privilege of being there when it's launched, the global end-time harvest. Probably at least 1 billion soul harvest. Yeah, but you keep talking about Russia because that's where it's going to start. It's going to start in Russia. That's why I have to say Russia. Well, it's not relevant to me. It is to Jesus. It is to Jesus. Well, who do you think you are? Chosen. Called. But just who do you think? Called, chosen. Talk to God. It's his problem. It's his. We got to say yes. We don't have to figure out, now, why did you pick us? That's not what we have to figure out. We have to figure out, am I going to say yes? And then when Gideon says, okay, here we go. There's 132,000 of them. There's 300 of us. And we're going to have a trumpet and a torch and a clay pot. That's what we get. I'm sure they had a sword on their side, but that's what we get. And he didn't do that until they were chosen and it was done. They were down to 300. And he said, here's what we're going to do. And the Doolittle Raiders, which I've spoken about, which God has so profoundly spoken to me about, that story will come out next week, is they trained like crazy to do what was considered impossible and had never been done before. And they trained and trained and trained, and they were not told, this is going to be an incredibly dangerous mission. Chances are pretty good. On the Doolittle, you won't come back alive. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination on this. And they found out when they were at sea on the USS Hornet on the way to Japan. Folks were going to Japan. That's what Jimmy Doolittle said. That's when the sailors found out. That's when almost the entire crew, they found out while they were on the way. This is what we're going to do. We're going to bomb Japan. It was the first offensive strike in the Pacific theater of World War II. It changed the entire scope of the war. Now, this was this week. Timing is everything. There's a day. So this came, on a feast day. Yom Kippur is a feast day. It's their most solemn feast day. What do I think God is saying in this? This piece came back 3 days after a 40-day fast. This piece was given to me about a week before a 40-day fast. What do I believe this stick is? It's holy. Yom Kippur stands for forgiveness and restoration. What can I say? Why did it stay there so long? Because God was keeping it there. Why did those people stay at New Covenant all that time period? Because they had to give the stick back. Do you really think God's that involved in our lives? The God I serve. The one that has given us these kinds of examples. This is your history. These are your stories as well as mine. Yes, God has to develop a leader, but he has to develop a team that follows. It has to become your assignment. It is mine, but these have come to us. We were on the Temple Mount on April 28th. We went on the 17th. We went to Ukraine. We have been all over Russia. It's not just me. We are on this property that God picked. It started on November 1st, 1981. It's not just me. Yes, God's called me to be a leader, but it's we. That's why I'm telling these stories. That's why Israel was told every year, tell the stories in the sequence of the feast. Tell the stories again and again of what I've done. So they'll believe in me. So they'll trust me. These are our stories. Yes, he's called me. There are stories. 56 of us were there. I was only one of them. The bus was full of NCF people on 70707 when the only ones, at least in the state of Tennessee, had a 70707 license plate. There was only one. That group came here on their 50th day. There was only one place they were. It was the end of the tour. It was here. It was for us. I am trying to influence you. I do believe we have 2 opportunities of a lifetime. To flip the switch, to awaken the sleeping giant, that's 1. To be directly involved in the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, that's 2. Those are pretty lofty assignments. Do you just come up on that on your own? No, I've tried to pay attention. 34 years. They're your stories. So it was on Yom Kippur, a most holy day of total fasting for Israel, a most joyful day. It was considered a joyful day because it was a time where they celebrated forgiveness, God forgiving them for their idolatry back in the golden calf, and restoration. And on that day, he does this. 9 years, 5 months afterwards. Unbelievable. But it happened. So, there's a 40-day prayer and fasting starting Tuesday at lunch. We're doing that so that we can break the fast on lunch on the 40th day, after the 40th day. If you're interested in going on the Awaken the Sleeping Giant, we're calling it the Awaken Outreach. You have to see all of the prophetic history videos. Just go onto YouTube and put NCF prophetic history and calling. If you just go to YouTube and search those, they'll all be there, including last week's. Bondage Breaker. You're required to see the Bondage Breaker's DVDs if you've not seen them. There's 10 sets at the moment in the office. If you have any inclination, yeah, I'm going to do this, you need to get them. You need to watch them. You'll need to pray through the 7 steps to freedom with someone. A lot of intercession. This is 40 days of prayer, Bible study, intercession, praying in the Spirit. We're preparing ourselves. It's a joyful time. The last time we did a 40-day fast, it was desperation. We get to do this. We get to be involved. How is this possible? Chosen. Well, do you think you're so good? It has nothing to do. We were chosen from before the first day that we met as a congregation. Had nothing to do with our performance or behavior. Had nothing to do with that. It's chosen. Yes, we could have become so entangled in our own sin and the cords of our sin that we weren't able to be available. A lot of intercession, prayer in the Spirit, waiting for the now cue. We're waiting for the now cue. Now is when you do it. The day. Like Gideon's army and Doolittle's teams. You will not be told until we're flying on the way to Moscow. Well, I can't do that. Okay, I probably don't blame you. I can't seem to get it to advance. That was the last slide? Well, that's why it won't advance. See, that's the last slide, folks, and it won't advance because it's the last slide, you understand? Are you excited? You better believe it. This doesn't happen, but it is. It has. They're real stories. They really happened. The Bible's a book of stories, God's stories. I believe these are God's stories. Well, just who do you think you are? I can't go there. Don't go there. This is not possible. Okay. You can go there and this is not possible and not possible yourself out. Don't do that. Fast. Like you're getting ready to flip the switch to start the end time global harvest. Oh my goodness. Well, has God given an indication? It's okay if I do it as minimal as possible. Yom Kippur, it was total. No water, no food. I'm not saying 40 days of no water, no food. But don't say, well, I could easily just not eat frosted Cheerios. Do you normally eat frosted Cheerios? No, I hate frosted Cheerios. And that's what you're going to do for a fast? You're not going to eat frosted Cheerios? Yeah. Read the scriptures. If you don't have any indication, read what we've printed in the bulletin given to you as an insert. Read the Gospels. Read the epistles that are given. Read the Psalms that are given. I think there's 120. If there's not, we'll add to it. Read a chapter at a time. Pray in the Spirit. Pray in the Spirit. Pray in the Spirit. And be ready. Get your passports. This is not a time to say, well, I'm thinking about. If you're thinking about, do it. How many will be going? I don't know. Do I think it's going to be a big mob? I doubt it. Is it a walk in the park? No. Do you think there'll be spiritual opposition? Are you kidding? It's just unbelievable. But I believe it. And I'm willing to lay everything on the line to lead you in this direction. Because these things happened. It's the prophetic history and calling of this congregation. We're not the biggest, we're not the best, we don't have the fanciest, we don't have the most. We're not the smartest, I'm not the best communicator, I talk long time periods. And it takes me more than 45 seconds to tell my name. Chosen. Well, why? Ask God. So our job is to say, yes, I have come to do your will. Yes. It's a really unusual moment. I hope you have 4 more minutes. Jonathan, can you possibly look up real quickly, it might as well be me. In the first Temple Mount trip, in that small prayer room that was in really the Arab sector of Mount Zion, we heard this song, "There's a call coming from heaven, somebody's going to answer." And the song says, might as well be me. Somebody's going to answer. Somebody's going to do it. I made a DVD of this. Unfortunately, we can't find this. This ends real bad. I mean, it just abruptly starts. It's 4 minutes. It's called "It's Might As Well Be Me" by Leanne Squires. Can you play it? Please, loud. A little higher. Recover all. 12s. Might as well be you. And I think you have the chance. But you have to seize the opportunity of lifetime during the lifetime of that opportunity. You have to. You've been very patient. Lord, thank you. I do believe you are calling us from the throne. And I choose to say yes. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.